Very good afternoon, friends and members of the Readers and Writers Club. A very warm welcome to a very exciting session with three eminent personalities. Mr. Krishnan Srinivasan, former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Karan Thapar, a very noted journalist, and Miss Oindrilla Dutt. I won't take much time. I will quickly introduce them, and they are going to be in conversation on Mr. Srinivasan's book, The Ambassador and the Private Eye. Mr. Krishnan Srinivasan is a former ambassador and foreign secretary who writes novels besides books and commentaries on international affairs. He's a columnist and book reviewer for several Indian dailies. This book, The Ambassador and the Private Eye, is his sixth novel. A very warm welcome, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you so much for your time and
Thank you.
thank you for being on the show. Mr. Karan Thapar is the only Indian television professional who has worked for 10 years in television outside India. Trained as a correspondent, producer, editor, and presenter with the London Weekend Television in the United Kingdom, where Mr. Thapar has worked for programs as varied as Weekend World, The World This Week, The Business Program, The Walden Interview, and Eastern Eye. In 1995, Mr. Thapar won the Oneida Pinnacle Award for Best Current Affairs Presenter for the program The Chat Show. Thank you so much, Mr. Thapar. It's very kind of you to agree to be on this show. Thank you so much for
Welcome.
being here.
Pleasure.
Oindrilla Dutt, who is an arts and events curator and presenter, having presented events at heritage venues such as Raj Bhavan, Princep Memorial, Laskar Monument, and so on, has worked with renowned artists such as Pandit Hari Prasad Chaurasia, Amitabh Bachchan, Usha Utub, Malika Sarabhai, Vikram Ghosh, and so on. She has been a broadcaster and a moderator who has interacted with late Yash Chopra, Mahesh Bhupati, Jaya Bachchan, Malika Sarabhai, Shobha De, and so on. Oindrilla is also a freelance writer, having written a book on the Kolkata police, columns for leading dailies such as The Telegraph and The Times of India, and articles for a variety of publications. She's associated with a number of NGOs, such as the Indian Institute of Cerebral Palsy and the Calcutta Samaritans. She has her own organization named as Open Doors. Thank you, Oindrilla, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mona, for the introduction. And thank you to Ahava and the Writers and Readers Club, the Readers and Writers Club, for inviting us to do this. I'm delighted to be here moderating at this discussion about Krishnan Srinivasan's book. I'm holding it up for you. I hope you can see it. The Ambassador and the Private Eye. Chris, first question to you. You've written extensively about foreign affairs, about the British Commonwealth, Europe, Asia, Buddhism in Asia, your tenure as Foreign Secretary, and much more. What made you turn to the detective genre of writing? This, I think, is your sixth Michael Marco book. So was this always a favorite genre of yours, something that you liked reading and wanted to do?
Well, why does one write anything, really? I think one writes because one feels one has something to say. And I think that after I retired, I was very interested in writing not necessarily thrillers, but writing about political matters in a fictional way. And my earlier my earlier five books have been rather political in nature, where you have people uh, trying to grasp political problems and finding solutions to them. But in this book, the last one, of course, there's a very, very minor political aspects, and this last book is mainly about crime, punishment, and detection. So I came to this kind of format relatively recently.
Okay. Mr. Thapar, uh, you, I'm sure, are a voracious reader. What are the kind of books you read? And do you like detective stories? Do you have a weakness for them?
I'm not as voracious as I used to be. Unfortunately, newspaper cuttings and research for interviews now is most of the reading I do. But when I get a chance to read a book that I've chosen because I'm interested in it, they tend to be biographies. I'm sort of drawn towards biographies because I'm fascinated by learning about people's lives, the relationship between their personality, their career, and the outcome. Um, Detective fiction, to be honest, is something that I did read fairly, to use your phrase, voraciously when I was in my teens, and it tended to be Agatha Christie most of the time, a little bit of Perry Mason, but mainly Agatha Christie. To be honest, I found Chris's new book fascinating because I'm really drawn to the personality of Michael Marco. I think he's an engaging human being, and he's the exact opposite of the sort of pushy, arrogant, outgoing human being that one often associates with successful detectives. This is an endearing, soft, silent, shy, retiring man who prefers to be invisible rather than to be upfront. And I found his personality fascinating. And of course, the other thing about him that's absolutely enrapturing is that he is bloody brilliant. And by the way, let me add, so is the author. When I first knew Chris, the most amazing thing about him was his rapier like intelligence. And frequently, by the way, he would cut through anything you were saying like a knife through hot butter with a caustic comment that completely floored you because you knew that he knew the subject better than you and it was time to shut up. And Michael Mark was not as rough and tough as Chris can be, but nonetheless, in his quiet way, he's very intelligent. And that, I think, is something that draws me to him. That and his shy, endearing, gentle personality.
I'm going to come back to Michael Marco later because there's loads that I want to ask about him. But first, Chris, I want to ask, what made you conceive of a feisty, young, one-armed, Harley Davidson riding detective like Coal Dave? How did you think of her?
Yes, Karan's already mentioned Michael Marco, who's one of the protagonists of this novel. He's actually a Somali diplomat, retired, forcefully retired, I would say, and his country is in ruins. Now, in Kolkata, where this book is located, the scene is located. He meets this lady, as you correctly mentioned, young and rather a woman with a great deal of bravura, and who has a handicap, and who also rides a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Now, she is, of course, the private eye, Michael Marco being the ambassador in the title. Now, the private eyes in India, by and large, don't have a very good reputation. They slink around and are considered a little bit unsavory. Now, I wanted to find somebody who was, or write about somebody who's completely different. And in India, anyway, there are very few, if any, female private eyes. I must stop here just to say what a private eye stands for. A private investigator in America was shortened to private I, the letter I in the English alphabet. And the I was then expanded to EYE. So this is how originates as the private eye. But in India, coming back to the thread, there are very few females in this profession. Maybe just as well because the profession is not very highly regarded. But I wanted to create a female who is completely different, who was a private eye, who's got plenty of experience of policing because she's been a police officer, an extremely intelligent woman because she was top of the civil services examination. And in every way, she's invalided out of the police because of her injury to her arm. And so she is completely different. And what I wanted to contrast was the difference between the rather old Somali ambassador from Africa and the young India, if you like, represented by Koel Dev.
Okay. Literature has introduced us to many memorable sleuths, private eye detectives. Karan mentioned Sherlock Holmes. He mentioned the Agatha Christie, Poirot, Miss Marple's there. There's Sherlock Holmes, there's Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, any number of them. So who did you like? Did you get influenced or did you have favorites amongst any of these?
Well, I've read most of the ones that you mentioned. Of course, nowadays you'd find that the Poirot, Miss Marple's type of detective, a little bit passé, perhaps. They're very genteel, and they usually end up by having all your suspects in the same room, and then you have the denouement, the climax, where the detective unfolds, if you like, unveils the criminal. Now, I think that's a tradition which is slightly now expired, and now you have a completely new cast of characters. If I had to find a particular character who I read quite a lot of and was rather impressed by, I would say it's Inspector Maigret of Georges Simenon. I think that the Maigret stories were very, very attractive to me. He was much more actually like the Marco type of person. I mean, he wasn't the detective. Marco is not the detective, but Maigret was the detective. Those novels were in French, but all of them have been translated into English.
Okay, Mr. Thapar, this book has Christians, Kashmiris, Bangladeshis, Sikhs, Muslims, Bengalis, Hindus, Rajasthanis, and from your many work visits, I'm sure, to Kolkata, would you say that this reflects the cosmopolitan diversity of Kolkata?
Possibly, but I'm not very familiar with Calcutta at all. It's a city I visited a couple of times, never for more than a day or two. So I would be presumptuous if I were to actually give you a definitive answer to your question. My impression of Calcutta from cousins who live there, from Chris and Grinda who stay there, is that it used to be in the 70s and 80s and maybe even the 60s, India's premier city, the most sophisticated, certainly the most metropolitan. And I imagine that continues, even though since then it is a much more, if I can coin a phrase, bonglified city than it used to be. But I imagine the metropolitan character and the sophistication hasn't been drowned under what I'm calling, perhaps mistakenly, the bonglification of the place. So I'm really giving you a hunch of an answer rather than one that is necessarily informed.
Okay. Chris, we're going back to Michael Marco. As you said, he's a Somali diplomat who's waiting to find his way back home. And he's laconic, quiet, unassuming, but intriguing despite his quiet reflectiveness. Why and how did you etch him like this as a perfect foil to Koel Dev?
Okay, well, that I think it goes straight to the point. Why Michael Marco? Actually, he figures in all the six
Karan,
novels.
sorry, I'm so sorry. Chris, could you be a little louder, do you think?
Yes, I was. That takes me very much to the main character of all the novels I've written. This is a Somali diplomat called Michael Marco. Now, there are no Somali diplomats called Michael Marco today, probably, but in those days, there I did meet on my ambassadorial posting in Lusaka, Zambia, a Somali diplomat, Roman Catholic, from what was then Italian Somaliland, called Michael Marco. Now, he was extremely shy, he was a person who was he kept to the walls in cocktail parties. He never liked to fraternize or socialize. It was much later that one realized that he was instrumental in shipping weapons to the liberation movements in Southern Africa. That was the Namibian movement in South Africa and Zimbabwe, Rhodesian as it then was, and Mozambique. So he was a man who was really almost a ambassador undercover. His actual
Yeah.
activities were far more penetrating and more significant than the whole of the rest of us. He was the character on which I have based this fictional Michael Marco. This Michael Marco, I met again, the real Michael Marco, I met again in New York when I was posted there. And he was then representing the OAU in New York. And we met a couple of times. I deeply respected him. And after that, I'm afraid we drifted apart. I don't know now whether he's alive or not alive, very unlikely to be alive. But I don't know anything about him after New York. And it's my loss. I feel really ashamed that I didn't make efforts to keep in touch. You know, in the days before email, it wasn't that easy to keep in touch with people unless you wrote letters longhand. And perhaps I
Yes.
was never very good at that. But that's where Michael Marco comes from. He was actually a real person, a Somali, appointed by his government. He was a lawyer, but appointed sort of out of the blue, did great things in Southern Africa, and then, from my point of view, disappeared from view.
Okay. Mr. Thapar, Marco is stranded in Calcutta because his government has collapsed, his country is in shambles. And right now, there could be quite a few others in this situation, couldn't there? Like the Afghans and the Burmese. What do you think
Yes,
about that?
tragic from their point of view. And from the point of view of our government, I would say rather sad that we pay very little heed and attention to their needs and requirements. We're not very kind to the Afghans who are stuck in our country. We've done very little to make them comfortable, whether it's students or diplomats. We've even refused entry to people who are former Afghan politicians and MPs who have a right to come without even a visa. They were actually turned back from Delhi airport and sent to Turkey. So, frankly, this is a tragic situation made worse by the very unsympathetic, cold, and hard-hearted attitude of our government, which I don't believe stands our government or our country in good stead. So, yes, a large part of me is embarrassed, if not partly ashamed, by how we are treating the modern-day Marcos stranded in our country.
Chris, you know, I'm referring to some of the chapters now. We're not going to give away too much, but some of them, especially, maybe all of them, could lend themselves beautifully to translation onto the screen or the small screen. There's this chapter, the story about the set of a film set and a crime that happens there. Then there's a really fascinating story about an arsonist, and another one about a so-called son, long-lost son, who surfaces. Another one on the river and an attempted drowning, perhaps. So which two things really. Did you have to do any research? Because there are a lot of bits about legal matters and the police, or did you just write it as it came to you? And secondly, which are the stories here that you find most engaging, and have you considered getting them onto perhaps a film format?
Okay, that's a pretty omnibus type of question. Let me see what I can do with that. It's like a parent giving birth to children, five children, eight children. You can't really say that you prefer some to the others. Maybe you do, but you'd certainly not admit it. I personally am quite invested in all these stories, so I wouldn't say that I prefer some to others. I think all of them are slightly different, and I think the important thing is the thread that goes through them is the relationship between the man, that is the Somali,
Mm,
of senior age, and the woman, um, the private detective, who is as different as could be from the man. I think that is really my focal point, and that is really um, what I'm really interested in, that relationship. The rest is scenario, if you like. This is and speaking about scenarios, yes, I think some people have told me that these stories are quite cinematic. Um, all of them perhaps have a lead into the next one. Um, they could be filmic. So I made a consultation, a very informal consultation with the leading um, uh, public relations and event managing person in Kolkata, and also one of the great former film stars in Calcutta, a film star of Satyajit Ray's epoch, and they agreed with me that there could be some elements of this book that could be translated into the small screen. I think that my experience is very limited, but from what I gather, this is a very, very long process. It goes through several stages: production, finance, this, that, and the other thing. So you could say this is at a very early stage. I have hopes, but not huge, high hopes, because you never know what's going to happen along the way. I mean, you probably remember a best-selling novel called Shantaram, which I
yes.
think came out at the end of the last century, perhaps, or early this century. Now, that was a smash hit in several continents, I think. It's about Mumbai, and basically about the criminal element in Mumbai. And that was quickly um, made into, I think, it went through various stages of becoming a film, including with a Hollywood cast and director and so forth. But we haven't seen the film yet, and that's what 20 years have gone by. So I'm not in any great hurry about this, but it would be nice if it happens. I think that there isn't any other question that I need to answer about this, except that I would find it hard to distinguish between one story and another. I think some lend themselves, some of the ones you suggested, lend themselves more to, let's say, the small screen than others. But that's entirely a matter of discretion and choice. I really couldn't comment on that.
Okay, and I just wanted to point out that Swaroop's Q&A was translated, and how big was it?
And that happened quite quickly. I agree with you. That happened quite quickly. Well, I
And
think it's a game of chance. You never know. You never know.
also, you talked about the relationship between Coel and Marco, and there's so much suggestion, auto suggestion, that gives it depth, layers of meaning. And there is this tantalizing prospect that that relationship could deepen into something more. Just a whiff of a romance somewhere. Did you mean that to be?
Very
Did
much
you?
so. Yes, very much so. I mean, it's an improbable circumstance if a young woman of 37, whatever, a very a woman full of energy and courage falls for a person who's not particularly outgoing, not particularly active, um, much more sedentary than she is, apart from being much older. But what I try to do is hint at the relationship that goes from respect to admiration, and from admiration to something close to love. But it's not physical love, of course. It's a love of two persons who have respect, admiration, and affection. And this is hinted at during the book by rather small gestures. I mean, the man puts his hand on her prosthetic limb, for example,
Yes.
which he feels very few people want to do for fear of embarrassing themselves or embarrassing her. And then when they walk, and one of the few occasions when actually they walk together, she takes his arm. And this is supposed really to be more meaningful than the usual gesture. And in
And
the
she
end,
asked him out, of course, to the Oberoi. Mr. Thapar, you're writing a column still, you've written books. Have you ever thought of writing a novel? Is that something that's a possibility?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think I'm the sort
No?
of person who has a mind that would stretch logically or emotionally in that direction. I don't think I can craft a story either with sufficient interest or sufficient intricacy to stretch into a novel, because that I think is an essential feature of a novel. There has to be a narrative, there have to be characters, they have to be real, and in a sense, they need to have an independence of their own outside the pen and the mind of the author. I'm not sure I have the talent to do that. The other thing, of course, is that it also does require a certain discipline. And I'm not sure I have the talent for that either. So I think columns and interviews are perhaps the limit of my skill.
Okay. One more question for you. Do you find any chapters in this book that you can relate to personally? For example, there is an arsonist in this book, and I believe...
Did you say an alchemist?
No, arsonist.
Oh, arsonist. And you think of me as an arsonist, do you? Someone who sets things afire.
But I believe in the 1980s, you broke a global scoop about Nigerians who went around setting fire to tax offices rather than paying taxes, government buildings. Did you?
I'll take your word for it, and it certainly sounds like the sort of scoop I'd like to own up to, but I have no memory of it. I suspect with age, my intellectual faculties are weakening. I did have a scoop, not about Nigerian taxpayers setting fire to tax offices, but the Nigerian Foreign Office actually was ablaze, a bit like Towering Inferno. I don't know if you remember that movie. I'd gone out to dinner with a couple of friends to a Lebanese restaurant called Bagatelle, and we were driving down Marina, which is a bit like Marine Drive in Bombay, and on the beach was this Towering Inferno completely blazing away, and at ground level were a collection of Nigerian firefighters who had a Simon snorkel, which is one of those machines that zigzags up all to the top. And there was a huge, I suppose, a tube-like thing coming down all the way to ground level, but there was no pump to pump the water up. So they were pouring water from the sea by hand into it. And I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen in my life. So I quickly dropped my guests back at their home, popped my night guard into the car, came back, and did a story. And it appeared the next morning on the front page of the Times in London, and the Nigerians were furious. And it actually ended up with getting me deported from the country. So that school also was the end of my journalistic life in Lagos.
Well, I think that could be the start of a very good novel.
Absolutely. In fact, I was going to ask him that when you said so firmly that no, do you think it takes a different kind of discipline to write a novel?
to that of a journalist? Oh, almost certainly. I mean, journalists, particularly television anchors, need to be somewhat obsessed with the facts of the case, particularly if you're trying to prove to your guest that he's got it wrong. And you need to be accurate, and you need to have them at your fingertips, and there needs to be a sort of bullet-like repartee with which you demolish the case he's building. So that's a completely different mindset. There's nothing very imaginative or creative about it. It simply requires your knowing something and being very quick to shoot it out. The sort of creativity, the sort of feel and flair for language, so that you deliberately choose to express yourself in a way that is new, novel, and perhaps even sometimes just impressive. I mean, I've got with me one of the most delightful phrases from Chris's book, which I think I will always remember. He describes the end of the monsoon in Purulia with the following words. He says, "The leaves and twigs were full of trembling drops." And if you think about it, after the rain, that's exactly how leaves look. They're heavy with drops. And before the drop actually falls, you can almost see the leaf trembling. And I thought that was such an evocative phrase. And there's another one of his. He talks about a shabby building seen from a car window. And he says, "It turned into dull silver by a fat January moon." I love that phrase, fat January moon. It sort of evocatively paints it there for you to look at. That capacity to think of a clever phrase that captures something and vividly brings it to life without being labored about it is a talent that he has, and it's a talent that's necessary to novel writing. It's completely unnecessary when you're a journalist doing interviews or, for that matter, columns.
Thank you. Chris, we don't have much time, but I just want to ask you that you're a prolific writer. What are you planning next? Is it going to be in the detective line? Are you going back to diplomacy and foreign affairs?
Well, I've actually just today got the approval from a fairly important publisher in India and UK to publish a compilation on power and legitimacy in international relations. So it's completely different again from novels, and I'm not going to do this on my own. I'm going to write a chapter, but there's several friends of mine who are very eminent political theorists who are going to write other chapters, and we're going to cover both the Western Hemisphere and the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, East Asia, Japan. So we're going to cover the entire world, dealing with this question of there is a tension always between power and legitimacy. We have people in power, but they're not necessarily legitimate. And we have people who are extremely legitimate in power, in office, and who have very limited power for various reasons. So these are the contrasts I'd like to deal with. Coming to fiction, I would very much like, actually, you perhaps remember that right at the end of toward the end of this novel, Coil Dave, whose nickname, Darkna, is Minnie. Minnie says to Michael Marco, very gently, she says, "You're going back to Somalia. Can I come with you?"
Yes.
And what I'd really like to do, of course, is to take both these characters to Somalia. But the trouble is, I've never been in Somalia. The only person I know who's been in Somalia, to my acquaintance, is MJ Akbar. I don't know how long he spent there. I doubt whether I can ask him for enough detail to write a novel.
But you've done many stints in Africa.
Yes, but Somalia is very different. It's got, at the moment, it's plagued with factions. There are people riding jeeps and shooting each other dead. There are Islamic militants there on the prowl. No, it's a very difficult country. So as much as I'd like to, I'm afraid I don't see myself writing another Michael Marco novel unless he goes to somewhere else that I've been to.
Okay, I have one question. It can be a short answer, long answer, before we get on to any questions if we have. Why is it that this feisty young woman, very bright, always needs a Michael Marco to do the final solving?
Well, that I suppose is a very fundamental question. Um, Michael Marco's strength is in thinking things through.
Quiet reflection.
Her strength is in doing the investigative part of it, and her great strength, which is commented on in the book, is her able to recapitulate the narrative clearly enough for Michael Marco to make his deductions. So I think that I'm not suggesting that she couldn't have solved the cases by herself, but Michael Marco gives her a shortcut to the answers. And you must remember that he has such great humanity that even when the culprits are found, uh, in some cases, she doesn't follow through. On his advice, he says that is it man's justice or God's justice? And if it's God's justice, I think the criminals, if you like, or the malefactors are left alone. I like that kind of ending.
Yeah. And I
Can I
like the
come in
thought.
there? Can I come in there for a second? I think there's a very simple answer, actually. If Michael Marco didn't, towards the end, actually solve the mystery by tying together whatever the lady's been unable to fit into a big picture, there would be no room for Michael Marco.
Yes.
Look at the stories.
That's
Michael frequently appears right at the very end of it. He's an endearing person, right? But if he didn't have that role, he wouldn't feature at all.
Absolutely.
And hence there would be no book.
And just to comment on what you said, Chris, God's justice and our justice, it comes out in that arsonist chapter where it's a very humane end because of the problem that this man faced. Yeah. Okay. This has been absolutely wonderful to be with Krishnan Srinivasan and with Karan Thapar. And I'm going to hold this book up once more, The Ambassador and the Private Eye. If you haven't got it, please do get it. And thank you so much, Ahava, Mona Sengupta, and Sushroota. I'm going to invite Mona on. Mona, if there are any questions from the audience, would you like to come on?
Thank you so much, Oindrilla. We don't have questions, but there have been several comments from our viewers complimenting all of you, and all of them have said they are waiting to read the book now. They are eagerly waiting to get a copy and read the book, and they've congratulated all of you. So a big thank you for this very erudite and interesting and engaging session. And all the best to the three of you. And thank you once again on behalf of Readers and Writers Club, Mr. Srinivasan, Mr. Karan Thapar, and Oindrilla for coming on board. We wish you all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And good night.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it.